and welcome back to our podcast. I'm the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
So, we're going to be starting a new series about some of the most disturbing and creepypastas that we've found. We're going to be covering some that I'm sure you probably heard that we dislike ourselves, and then we're also going to be probably following some that may be a little more or less well known. The first one that we're going to cover is a bit different than some of the others in that it's written in a journal type style format. So it's a very cool story though, and it's called Psychosis. And it starts off on Sunday. And the story begins with the writer talking about their decision to write down the odd things that he has been noticing. He says that he's just trying to organize his thoughts in an effort to make sense of the situation. He then goes on to say that he is beginning to feel cramped in his small apartment. He questions whether that might be causing him to have issues in his life. So he's kind of wondering, if maybe he's just not being around people and he's in this little apartment and that's what's causing him to feel off, basically.
Yeah.
So he then describes his apartment as being in the basement of this building, and it has no windows, which allows the days and nights to slip by unnoticed by them, which makes him kind of question whether maybe that's part of the problem, because he works from home and he stays indoors a lot. He says that he works from home as a programmer, and that he's been working tirelessly over the past few days and has not left his apartment at all during this time. He wonders if maybe the hours of sitting in front of his computer monitor might be having an effect on him, but he dismisses this quickly and just thinks that's probably not it, it's something else, something's going on. He says that he's not sure when he began feeling like something was off. He even says that he's not even sure what exactly he's feeling. He just wonders if the isolation that he's been keeping himself in might be impacting him. So he then talks about how he would normally talk to other programmers while he was online. However, lately no one had been online, and he says he even sent direct messages to his friends, but they had remained unanswered. So he's really just kind of isolated, and he can't get in touch with anyone at this point. He says that the last email he got was from a friend saying that he would reach out when he got back from the store, and he says that that's been like a day before, and he still hadn't heard anything from his friend. He claims that he would just try to call his friend normally, but the basement had horrible cell phone reception, so that wasn't an option. He then decides that he just needs to get out for a bit. So he's like, I've been inside too long, I just need to get outside, that's what's going on. So he goes outside, he thinks, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to take my phone, call someone, that's just all I need. I just need to talk to somebody and I'll feel better. He notices in the mirror that he has a few days worth of stubble on his face, but decides it doesn't really matter as he's only stepping out for just a bit to make a quick phone call. However, he does decide to put on a clean shirt since it was around lunchtime and it was likely he might run into somebody he knew. So he's going to go outside for a little bit, get some fresh air, whatever. He talks about slowly opening the door of his apartment and then feeling this strong sense of apprehension. Though he wasn't sure why he felt this way, as nothing really seemed out of the ordinary, but something was just telling him, don't leave the apartment. He figures that it's just because he hadn't had any contact with anybody for a few days, and he looks down the hallway leading to the apartment, noting that it looks dingy. He describes the hallway, saying that at one end there sits this large metal door which leads to the building's furnace room, and that the door is normally locked for security purposes, he assumes. He then says that beside the door sat these two soda machines, and he tells about how he had bought one of the sodas from the machine when he had first moved in, but he discovered that it had expired 2 years ago.
Well, that's pleasant.
Right. And he figures that probably nobody other than him and his landlady were even aware that they were there, because his was the only apartment down on the bottom floor, or in the basement. So he figures nobody else even knows they're there, so his landlady's like really cheap, so that's probably why she didn't even bother to rotate the stock, because she just didn't care. He says that he was careful not to make a sound when he was exiting his apartment, though he didn't really know why he felt like he needed to do that way. He just felt like he couldn't break the silence around him other than the soft droning from the drink machines. For something, I don't know, he just felt creeped out for some reason. So he heads upstairs towards the building's exit, but before leaving the building, he looks through this small window that's sitting in the door, like at around eye level. There's just little square window, and it's like a big metal door that leads outside to go, outdoors. So he looks out the window, but he's shocked at what he sees. He thinks it was around lunchtime, but outside it's like really dark, and he's like confused and everything. He notices that there's like nobody out. He's like looking around, he doesn't see anything, and everything seems really still and quiet. But other than he can see like the leaves, moving with some wind, and he can hear the wind through the door, but that's all he can hear. And he's looking around and he thinks, well, that seems weird. He says he can remember shivering, though he didn't feel cold. So he gets that shiver, sometimes you get down your spine,
Yeah.
He says that he then decided he was not going to go outside, and he's just going to take his phone out and check to see if he has signal near the door. And he says he smiles when he sees that he does. He quickly dials his best friend Amy's number, and he then raised the phone to his ear, and he hears it ring just once, then nothing. He says he listened to the silence, hoping it was just like a hiccup or something, how it does sometimes, or whatever, and the call will connect. But after several seconds, he gives up on the call, and he thinks, well, I don't know. So he's going to try again. He thinks, well, maybe just some little something happened, whatever, because the signal, could have been not as good as he thought. So he tries to call again, but just as he's about to dial the number, the phone rings. And he answers the call, and he hears a voice that sounds like this college-age boy, and the boy sounds confused and asks who he is, to which the man replies, John. The boy apologizes and then says he has the wrong number. So he checks the number that had called, but he didn't. But noticing, because he didn't pay any attention before, he just answered it, and then he, checks it after the call ended, and he discovers that he doesn't recognize the number, which, why would he? It was the wrong number. And then, just then, the phone rings again, and this time, however, he checks the number before answering it, and again, he says he notices that it's a number he didn't know, but he answers it anyway, wondering if it, who it is. And he soon hears a familiar voice. It's Amy, who explains that she's at a party and that her phone had died just right after he had called her, and she couldn't answer, like it was, the battery was almost dead, and when she tried to answer, it just, cut off, whatever. So she borrowed somebody else's phone and asked if she could call, so she could call him back, So that was why the number was unknown, because she was calling from somebody else's phone. She asked him where he is, to which he replies, at his building, and she tells him he should come to this party. He declines, saying that he doesn't really feel like heading out in the middle of the night to a strange place, but she tells him that she can come pick him up. He asks her how drunk she is, and she agrees that she's probably too intoxicated to drive, and that walking would take too long. So, okay. So the pair soon hang up after John tells Amy that he's heading back to work. He's overcome with just like this feeling of loneliness, but he just dismisses these feelings. He then begins to think that there could be something hiding outside the front door. He feels like there's something out there watching him. And this creeps him out really badly, like it probably would most people. And he just says, screw this, and he just heads right back to his apartment. As soon as he enters his apartment, these feelings that he was having of fear subside. He feels okay again. He's like, it's weird, but whatever. Which then, of course, made him feel foolish for being so frightened in the first place, because he didn't see anything. He just had this creepy feeling. So he's just gotten a call from a wrong number, then a call from Amy using someone else's phone. There's nothing wrong. It just was just weird, and it's a weird scenario, basically, and it just kind of was creeping him out. So, but there was nothing wrong, and he felt stupid. So then he begins to think about the conversation that he had with Amy and realizes that something was just off about it, though. She claimed that she was at a party, but he hadn't heard anything in the background. It was just complete silence other than, her voice or whatever. He didn't hear anything going on.
That's a bit weird.
It is a bit odd, but then he reasoned that it might not even mean anything. She could have just stepped outside.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Something like that, or maybe even went into another room, where it was quiet so she could hear him. So he just dismisses it. All right, so the next day it takes up is Monday. So this next entry talks about how he had gone back upstairs and looked out the front window again of the front door, and he talks about how ridiculous his feelings were the night before and declares that he's going to shower and shave and just finally get outside. He then says that he hears something outside. He says that the sound was thunder, so the whole idea of going out was just like, no, and getting some fresh air didn't happen because it's, coming a storm or whatever, and he's like,
That's fair.
Screw it. So he heads back up to the front door to look outside because he has no windows and everything, and he sees that it's pouring rain. But this time, though, he can see that it's finally daytime, but it's like really gloomy light coming through the rain, as you can expect. It's gloomy, grayish looking,
Yeah.
And he stands at the window looking out, but cannot really make out anything other than some like odd shapes, because the rain's, just obscuring the window, basically. He says he doesn't feel like heading back to his apartment, so he just begins to wander around down a hallway in the building, just kind of walking around. And he notices that the doors in the hallway that he goes down are all painted blue, and they're all closed. He walks by each door, kind of listening in for a moment, but he don't hear anything. I guess he's like, sort of seeing if he hears like a TV or somebody talking or whatever. He doesn't hear anything, but not surprised really, because it's kind of the middle of the day, and he figures probably most people are at work. Kids, if they have kids, they're at school. Whatever. Most people are probably not home. So he stands in the hallway listening to the rain outside, and he begins to feel like the doors are these monoliths that were erected by this ancient civilization as guardians. He feels like these doors are guardians for some reason. I don't know why he feels that way, but he does. He then sees this flash of lightning and realizes that the hallway has this window nearby. And he heads over to this small alcove that has this inset window. And he feels excitement at the thought of finally getting this better look outside, because this window is actually pretty good size, so he can actually see out better. He notices that the window can be opened, but as he's reaching to open it, he's overcome with this feeling that there's something outside this window, and he doesn't need to open it, so he doesn't. He talks about how odd everything has been lately, and he decides to come up with a plan. He goes back to his apartment, and he gets his webcam, which he then runs the wire from it underneath his door, and he places the camera covertly between those two soda machines that were at the end of the hall or whatever. And he hides the cable against the black plastic strip that's running along the base of the wall using some black duct tape. He says he does this mainly because he's bored and really didn't have anything else to do or whatever, and he was just messing around more or less. He then runs back to his apartment, where he then watches the feed from his webcam. He says he's able to see the hallway completely outside his door and most of this nearby stairwell that leads down, to get to the basement. But he doesn't see anything interesting. There's nothing, he doesn't see anything, basically, other than his door, basically. He then notices that someone is logged online. So he's like, okay. He gets out this older webcam that he had in his closet, and he sets it up so he can video chat with his friend. He says that he couldn't really explain his weird feelings, but it did feel good. It was, he was excited just to see somebody else's face, because he hadn't saw anybody in several days. He says his friend says he didn't have much time to talk, and then they just sort of made like some just basic, like just a little small talk, nothing really meaningful. And the encounter made him feel better, and the strange fear that he had, it pretty much kind of went away. He then begins to think about the conversation, and he thinks about how his friend had been very vague in all their responses. He couldn't remember anything his friend had said in particular, other than his friend asking for his email to keep in touch. Which seems a little odd. If it's his friend, you might think he would probably already have it. But maybe not. You never know. He then gets an email from Amy, who asked him to meet her for dinner and at the place that they usually go to. He thinks about this pizza place that they normally go to, and begins to feel excited at the prospect of eating something, actually sort of substantial, other than what he had been throwing together from his poorly stocked refrigerator. So he'd just been eating like probably chips and crap like junk crap. He begins to feel silly again about his strange feelings, and decides that when he gets back from seeing Amy, he's just going to throw his journal away because it's just adding to his paranoia, basically.
To be fair, that is understandable because it's a pretty common thing. Like, if you write something down, it feels more real.
It can be, right. So I can kind of get where he's coming from, thinking, I'm just being stupid, I'm just going to get rid of this crap. This is just making me feel worse, whatever. So he's about to leave when he hears a chime from his computer indicating that he's gotten another email. So he hears like, ding, ding, whatever, his notification is. He opens it and finds that it's from a friend of his that he's not spoken to in quite a while. He notices that the email was not only sent to him, but to like this large list of other emails. So this was just like a mass email sent out to like several people. I don't know how many. We'll say 20. I don't know. As he thinks like it looked like his friend had just simply sent it to everybody in his contacts. So every single contact he had just sent this same email to. He noticed the email had no subject and simply said, "Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them."
Well, that's not creepy at all.
It is. It's very creepy. He's like, what? So he's confused by this and wonders, what it's supposed to mean. Then he begins to think about the email and thinks about over the last few days and the fact that he hasn't seen another single person in real life. Outside, walking around, nowhere. He again talks about how odd his video chat had been because it just been so vague. Then he thinks about his phone call with Amy and how he had to remind her where he lived. So during the phone call, she was like, that's the reason he asked her how drunk she was, because she couldn't even remember where he lived. He didn't even remember that he had told her that he lived a half hour's walk away from 7th Street, which is where she said she had been at the time. He begins to wonder if there's someone after him. someone that now knows where he lives. But again, he dismisses his thoughts, telling himself that this madness just has to end. He becomes upset and begins to run around his apartment, holding up his cell phone as high as he can, trying to get a signal. He finally goes into his little bathroom and he notices that he gets one bar, but he's having to hold his phone up like over his head. So he sends out this mass text message to everyone he knows, asking them if they had seen anyone face to face recently. He says at this point he just wanted anybody just to reply to him, no matter what they said. He thought about calling someone, but he found that the only way he could get the small signal required him to hold his phone, like I said, way above his head, and if he lowered it even just a little bit, the signal just went away. So he couldn't really get up close enough to it to put his ear to it where he could hear what they were saying. Now, I don't know why he couldn't use speakerphone, but whatever. Maybe this was older and he just didn't know. I don't know. He then remembered his computer and he rushed over to send messages to everyone online. No one responded and he began to grow frantic. He begged somebody just to answer him, that he just needed to see another person. He looks through his apartment trying to find some kind of forgotten electronic, something that he had, because, he was looking through his closets. He's literally just tearing his apartment apart, hoping he'll find some sort of electronic that he had forgotten about that would allow him maybe to finally get in contact with someone else. Feeling at a loss, he comes up with a plan to try taping his cell phone to the ceiling where it was getting a constant signal, thinking maybe somebody would eventually finally call him or send him a reply back to one of his text messages. Okay, so then now we're on Tuesday. So John awakens to his phone ringing. He runs to the bathroom where he had taped the phone to the ceiling, and he stands on the toilet lid and he answers it. The caller was Amy, and John immediately starts to feel better. Amy tells him that she had been really worried about him and had been trying to reach him since they had last talked. She tells them that she is coming over. John again decides he's going to throw away his journal before anyone sees it, saying he doesn't even know why he even started writing in it. He looks at himself in the mirror and sees that his eyes look sunken and that the stubble on his face is even thicker than before, of course, because it's been a few more days. He decides not to clean up his apartment, which he'd trashed the night before in his frantic state, deciding he wanted someone else to witness the hellish experience that he'd been having. So he begins to reason with himself, thinking that it was just a coincidence. He hadn't seen anyone else, like they were out, he was just looking out at an odd time, that one day it was raining, people probably wouldn't be out wandering around in the streets. Other time, it was kind of late at night and he thought it was earlier, whatever. So he decides to watch TV while waiting on Amy as a way to keep his mind distracted. He says he's happy that Amy was the only one that had responded to him, as they had been friends for years, and she'd be the most understanding of his crazy thoughts, basically. She wouldn't make him feel stupid, basically. So he at last hears a knock on his door, and he checks the webcam feed again and finds it odd because he doesn't see anybody at the door. But figured that it was probably just bad positioning and she was just standing off to the side a little bit weirdly or something, and he couldn't see her. So he yells through the door that he had placed a camera between the two soda machines because he had been feeling paranoid. He then says he sees her image walk over to the camera, kneel down, smiling and waving. Now there's a microphone on the camera so she can literally talk to him. So she then tells him to open the door, but he hesitates. How can he be sure it's truly Amy? He then asks her to humor him for a moment and tell him one thing that would prove it was really her. She then tells him that they had met randomly at a playground where both were too old to be at one, which was true, because he even goes on to say that they had looked like he just went to this playground one day, just sitting there, not really, like looking at kids or nothing, just like sitting on the bench, just relaxing or whatever, and she happened to be there too. So he feels relieved at this, deciding that, of course, it had to be Amy, because knowing that she would be the only other one that would know that he had never told anybody how they'd met, whatever. So that was Amy. He then tells her he'll be right there and goes over to the bathroom. He's going to brush his hair a bit and tells himself that even though he looked like hell, she'd understand. He heads over the door and he's just about to notice it, but then he notices that he has that old webcam that he had set up the night before to video chat with his friend is still there, and that the lens was pointed right at his journal where he had literally written an entry where he had been talking about how he had met Amy.
Well, that's a bit weird. Right.
And so on that very page, like I said, that was visible was the story of his and Amy's meeting. He had just kind of jotted it down or whatever, was just writing down random thoughts. He then begins to believe that the thing outside the door wasn't Amy at all, but an entity that had used his own journal against him.
That's a fair fear.
Not possibly. He then realizes that he could have been watched this whole time. He refuses to open the door, screaming in just like horror. He throws the old camera to the ground and starts stomping on it till it's just bits. The door begins to shake, and the doorknob starts turning, though he didn't hear Amy's voice. He just sees the door shaking, doorknob turning, somebody's trying to get in. He began to wonder if his door, which was made to keep out drafts, was simply too thick to hear her, or was she really there at all? He wondered what could be outside, if not Amy. He had heard her outside earlier, but was that real? He then begins to scream for help as he piles everything in front of his door. Okay, well then it picks up again, and it's Friday. He begins by saying that he thinks that it's Friday, but he's not sure, since he's broken every electronic in his apartment. He states that he is a programmer, so he knows all the ways that technology can be used to spy on him. So he's broke his TV, his computer, his phone, everything. He says that he's been going over and over what he had written in his journal as he paced his apartment back and forth while he alternated between terror and disbelief. He says that at times he is certain that there's some phantom entity is dead set on getting him to go outside. He then thinks back to his first phone call with Amy, who was trying to get him outside. He says a part of him feels like he's behaving like a lunatic, thinking again that it's likely just a coincidence that he had not seen another person, and that the weird email that he had gotten from that other friend, that was saying, seen by your own eyes, whatever, was probably like some virus or something that had just come in at exactly the right time, basically, just to set him on in more paranoia. So he says that another part of him, though, is convinced that the only reason the thing outside hasn't gotten him was his refusal to open his door. He goes on to say that he hasn't opened his doors in days after that strange encounter with Amy. He wonders if his phone call to Amy originally had been all the entity had needed to realize that he existed, and that it had been out before just dealing with other people, and it didn't realize that he was even a person that was alive in the world. So, he thinks back to the wrong number, in which he told the caller his name, and then just right after that, the so-called Amy called, which could explain how the entity knew his name, because the other one had asked him, what's his name? As soon as he hung up, he gets a phone call, and she knows his name now. But she doesn't know where he lives, and odd things, is what he's saying.
So the subsequent calls, it would slowly gather different hints about where he lives. All the information it needs to track him and hunt him.
Well, there you go. That's what he's thinking. So he talks about how he's overwhelmed with terror each time he tries to piece everything together. The email, short and seemingly cut off like someone was being stopped from trying to warn him. So he's like, that email just seemed weird. It seemed like it should have said more, whatever. It seems like somebody was literally trying to give him a bigger message, but something had stopped it. He couldn't get over the words of the email. Seen with my own eyes, don't trust them. Which was exactly what he'd been suspicious about. He then wondered why the entity couldn't enter. Why did it simply just knock on the door? He then remembered the upstairs doors that had reminded him like they were guardians. And then he reasoned that whatever was trying to get him to go outside must not be able to open doors on its own.
Old school vampire rules.
Sorta.
It can't enter without an invitation.
There you go. Sorta-ish. That's kind of what he's thinking. Like if he doesn't open the door, it can't come in. That's what he's saying. So then he thought about movies and books he'd read over the years, trying to come up with some kind of explanation that might actually support this. But nothing really seemed to really make sense, so he began to wonder what the entity even wanted for him. If it just wanted him dead, then it could be accomplished in many ways, including just waiting for him to eventually starve to death. I mean, he wasn't leaving, he was refusing to leave his apartment. Eventually, he's going to run out of food. If he's not opening his door, you know what I'm saying? And I'm guessing this was supposed to be an earlier time where maybe the DoorDash and food deliveries may not have been a thing as much. But even then, he was afraid to open the door for anyone, so there you go. Just then, he hears another knock on his door. He told whoever was at the door that he just needed a minute to think and then he would come outside. He could hear voices outside, but he reasoned that those could be faked electronically. The voices claimed to be Amy, along with 2 policemen and a psychiatrist. He admitted that the voices sounded pretty convincing, and he then decides to accept everything had just been a crazy misunderstanding. There was no entity trying to trick him into opening the door. He notes that the psychiatrist has the voice of an older person and that he found it soothing. He says he's desperate to finally see somebody in person because he's been isolated for, at this point, probably maybe a week or so, or maybe longer. The psychiatrist tells John that he is suffering from something called psychosis, and that he is just one of thousands of people that were experiencing these breakdowns that were triggered by a suggestive email that had gotten through somehow. Okay, so that seems odd to me, but...
That's a bit odd.
So, John then swears that the psychiatrist had said got through somehow. He then begins to wonder if the entity had just slipped up and revealed something.
Yeah, that sounds like that could be the way it is to me.
How would they know? I mean, how would he know about an email that he had got? So he says that the doctor says that John is part of this wave of emergent behavior and that there were lots of other people having the same fears. John finds this statement very strange since technically he had not told anybody about the fears he was having. And he hasn't yet. He hasn't talked to Amy other than those, brief phone calls or what.
No, the only thing I remember him saying is that he just wanted to see somebody else.
Exactly, but I mean, he hasn't told anybody what he's thinking. He then reasons that that odd email he'd gotten was not the actual email the doctor was talking about, and that he'd only received a portion of it, figuring his friend, too, had had a breakdown of sorts and was trying to warn others. The doctor then tells John that he too could have spread the paranoia with his own messages and texts that he had sent to everyone he knew. Again, how does he know this? I have no clue. The doctor tells John that he didn't want to lose another one and that people like John are intelligent, and that is what led to their downfalls. He tells John that people like him draw connections so well that sometimes they can find connections where none actually exist. So, in other words, he's just making all this up in his mind, and that's reasonable.
That's reasonable. That's a thing that happens.
If he knew the whole situation, but how does this doctor know? I don't know. He tells John it's easy to get caught up in all the paranoia in such a fast-paced world, which is constantly changing and where more and more interactions are becoming more simulated. He tells John that he has to give the doctor one thing. He did have a great explanation. Everything he said actually explained things perfectly. He decides that it's foolish to feel this fear of some unseen force and just waiting inside until he finally succumbed to starvation was, of course, just crazy. He realizes that surely there was no way that there was some entity had been able to get to everyone else and that there was no way that he was the only one left in the world. He again admits the explanation makes perfect sense and he has every reason in the world to just let go of his fears and finally open his door. He says that that's exactly why he is not going to open the door, because how can he be sure of anything? How can he know what is actually real? He says that everything is essentially just signals, either through his camera, his TV, phone, or computer, and these signals could be originating from anywhere. He has no way to decipher what's real and what's not. He then says that he has finally seen it with his own eyes, that there is nothing left to deceive him with, since he has destroyed everything in his apartment that could be used against him. Then he remembers the email again. Was that message desperately trying to tell him not to trust his own eyes? He wondered if what he had seen on his camera was real. He reasons that the camera and his eyes are the same and they both just turn light into electronic signals. He is adamant that he cannot be deceived and that he has to be sure of what is real. Now, the next entry is date unknown. John says that he has calmly asked for a pen and paper for several days until it was finally given to him. He asks what he is supposed to do, just gouge his eyes out. He says that he then basically does this, and now he has bandages on his head and that they feel like a part of him and that the pain is finally gone. So he's now gouged his eyes out, thinking that if he can't see these things and doesn't give in to them, that he's safe. He writes that this entry will likely be one of his last, since now that he has lost his sight, his writing will soon probably turn illegible. He says that the writing is just more or less just a self-indulgence, a relic of another time, because he is fully convinced that everyone in the world is either dead or something far worse. He says that he sits against his padded wall day in, day out as the entity brings him food and water. He claims that it masks itself as different things, such as a kind nurse or an unsympathetic doctor. He then says that the entity has likely realized that now that he has lost his sight, his hearing has sharpened significantly. So he now says that he can hear it fake conversations outside his cell. He says that he hears stuff like one of the nurses talking about having a new baby soon, one of the doctors talking about recently losing his wife in a car accident, and he says that none of it matters anyway since none of it's real.
Oh, God. I can already see where this is going.
He says, well, I don't know that you can because it's crazy. John says that the only thing that gets to him is when the entity visits him masquerading as Amy. He admits that the recreation is perfect. It sounds and feels just like her. It even produces a reasonable facsimile to tears, which then makes him feel on its lifelike cheeks. He says that when he was first dragged here, the fake Amy told him everything he had longed to hear. It told him she loved him, that she'd always loved him, and that it didn't understand why he would do this, and that the pair could still have a life together if only he could stop insisting that he was being deceived by everyone. He says that he knew that it was trying to deceive him and that it needed him to believe what he was being told. He says that at first he had doubted himself and that he had almost fell for the entity's scheme, but everything was just too perfect. He says the fake Amy used to come every day and then come like every week until it just finally stopped coming altogether. He says he knows that the entity will never give up and that the waiting game is just another tactic. He says that he will never give up and continue to resist for the rest of his life. He says that while he is not sure what happened to everyone else, he also says that he knows with every fiber of his being that the entity needs him to fall for these deceptions so that it can take over him. He figures that this makes him a thorn in the entity's side and that maybe Amy is actually still alive out there, kept that way only by his will to resist his deceiver. He says that this thought gives him hope. He says that he sits in his cell rocking back and forth to pass the time, but he will never give in and he will never be broken because he is a hero. Now the story finishes very crazily. The story finishes with a doctor reading a piece of paper that John had scribbled on, noting that it was barely legible, written in the shaky script of one who could no longer see. The doctor wanted to smile at the man's steadfast resolve, which was a reminder of the human will to survive, but he knew the man was completely delusional. After all, the doctor thinks a sane man would have fallen for the deception long ago. The doctor wanted to smile or offer words of encouragement to John. He also wanted to scream, but the nerve filaments that were wrapped around his head and to his eyes would not allow him to do so. Instead, his body walked in the room like a puppet and again told the patient that he was wrong and no one was trying to deceive him.
Huh.
Creepy as hell, but it does make you wonder. I mean, good God.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that coming.
That was nuts.
It crossed my mind, but no, I was so sure it was going to end up with him being in a mental hospital.
Exactly. I thought it was going to be, they just come find out he was crazy, whatever, but apparently he was not. So... That
is insane. That's a good story.
It is. It's very good. It's interesting because it's written, like it sounds like a crazy person. And you could absolutely, if it was true, you could absolutely see how you would go back and forth. You'd be like, well, this didn't seem right, but good, I'm just being stupid. That doesn't even make sense because, you know what I mean. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed our first segment. We're going to be continuing on next week with another one. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to stay disturbed.